Long before the rise of kingdoms, before the first cities carved their names into stone, the earth carried secrets now buried in silence. Tales whispered of beings too great to be human, too radiant to belong fully to the world below. These were not stories meant for children, but memories preserved in fragments of ancient texts, memories that stir questions of what truly walked the earth before the flood reshaped it forever. Among these forgotten texts lies the mysterious Book of Giants, a manuscript once hidden in desert caves near the Dead Sea. Though incomplete, torn by time, it reveals a story too powerful to be dismissed. It speaks of heavenly watchers who descended from their place of glory, of their forbidden unions with the daughters of men, and of hybrid children whose size and power changed the course of history. These children, the giants, were not fables told to frighten, but warnings written in parchment. Their presence marked an age of wonder and terror, when mankind lived under shadows cast by beings who stood taller than trees, beings whose hunger devoured fields and whose arrogance darkened the skies. The Book of Giants gives voice not only to their deeds, but also to their fears, their dreams of doom, and their desperate cries for mercy. The story is more than myth. It is a mirror held up to humanity. It asks us to remember what happens when pride crosses sacred boundaries, when forbidden knowledge is embraced without wisdom, when strength is worshipped above all else. It reminds us that even the mightiest can fall, and that no rebellion escapes the reach of justice. As we begin this journey into shadows before history, we step into a world where angels walked the earth, where giants ruled for a season, and where humanity's cry for deliverance rose to the heavens. These are stories that connect the fragments of ancient memory to the myths of every culture, stories that call us to listen, to wonder, and to ask what truths lie hidden in the ruins of time. If you are fascinated by forgotten histories, by legends that carry echoes of truth, then stay with us. And if you enjoy films like this, remember to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support keeps these hidden stories alive and helps them reach others who are searching for the same whispers of the forgotten. High above the earth, in realms beyond mortal eyes, dwelled the Watchers, angels appointed to observe humanity's unfolding story. They were not distant, detached guardians, but radiant beings who carried knowledge of the stars, the movements of time, and the mysteries of creation itself. For ages they watched the sons and daughters of men from their stations, marveling at their struggles, their fleeting joys, and their fragile mortality. The earth was beautiful, and mankind was vulnerable, and over time, desire began to take root where only duty was meant to dwell. The legend tells of a mountain, vast and immovable, that stood as a silent witness to the oath of these angels. Mount Hermon, a peak cloaked in snow and secrecy, became the altar where heaven's order was abandoned. Upon its summit, 200 descended, each radiant with an otherworldly light that dimmed as they set foot on the soil of earth. They looked upon one another, hesitant, for they knew the weight of their choice. Yet their leader, often named Semjaza, spoke with conviction, reminding them that if one faltered, all would suffer. So they bound themselves with an oath, sealing their rebellion with a covenant sworn under the stars. The air around them seemed to shiver as they pledged together, no longer servants of heaven's command, but seekers of their own desire. Their vow was more than a promise, it was a declaration of defiance, a step across a line that could never be retraced. The Watchers had abandoned their stations, and with that act, the balance between heaven and earth shifted. Their descent was not hidden. Ancient traditions speak of their brilliance as they came down, like fire streaking across the night, leaving men awestruck and trembling. Some saw them as gods, others as strangers who bore the likeness of the divine. Their beauty was overwhelming, their stature beyond human comparison. To stand before one of them was to stand in the presence of majesty and terror, as though the stars themselves had taken shape in flesh. The earth welcomed them with silence, yet the heavens grieved. For these beings were meant to serve as watchers only, never to interfere, never to indulge in the fleeting passions of men. Yet here they stood, eyes filled with longing, gazes fixed upon the daughters of the earth whose beauty stirred a fire within them. What began as quiet wonder grew into hunger, and what grew into hunger became the spark of corruption. The watchers were not alone in their defiance. Humanity, unknowing of the consequences, looked upon these newcomers with reverence. They were teachers, revealers of secrets, and bearers of knowledge long concealed. To men and women bound to the cycle of toil and survival, the watchers offered glimpses of mysteries far beyond mortal reach. It seemed a blessing, but hidden beneath the allure was the seed of destruction. The oath on Mount Hermon became the cornerstone of their new existence. They were no longer bound by heaven's will, but by their own desires. Their leaders' words carried weight, reminding them that they had crossed a threshold together. If judgment came, it would fall upon them all. Bound in rebellion, they stepped further into the world of men, not as fleeting messengers, but as beings determined to leave their mark upon the earth. The descent of the Watchers was more than a physical act, it was a spiritual wound. The earth felt the weight of their presence. Shadows seemed to stretch longer, and whispers of unease moved among the people. Though mankind celebrated the gifts of knowledge they would soon receive, the cost of such gifts had not yet been revealed. Every step they took upon the earth marked the beginning of a hidden war, a conflict not fought with armies and weapons, but with choices, boundaries broken, and laws defied. Their luminous forms, once symbols of purity, became symbols of temptation and forbidden union. Humanity could not know that their admiration would soon give way to fear, for what the Watchers desired would alter the very fabric of life. Semjaza and his companions believed their act was one of freedom, but the weight of their rebellion began to press heavily upon them. Though they had sworn together, the silence of the heavens was deafening. The stars above seemed colder, as if creation itself recoiled from their choice. Yet still they pressed forward, seduced by the beauty of what they saw before them. The stories passed down through ages described them not only as mighty but as restless. They were no longer content to simply dwell in heaven's light, nor to walk unseen among mortals. They sought to mingle, to bind themselves with those who were never meant to share their essence. This mingling would give rise to beings the world had never known, and it was upon this foundation that the legend of the giants would be built. The Watcher's descent marks one of the most haunting moments in forgotten history. It is the moment when heaven bowed its head in sorrow, when earth braced beneath a weight it could not bear, and when men, unaware of the storm rising, welcomed these radiant strangers with open arms. A forbidden bond was about to be forged, and through it the world would never be the same. The oath sworn on Mount Hermon echoes still, carried in the fragments of the Book of Giants, and in the memories of scattered traditions. It speaks not of angels who merely observed, but of watchers who became actors, crossing lines meant to remain forever untouched. What followed was both wondrous and terrible, a mingling of heaven and earth that would bring forth children of immense power, beings whose shadows stretched across the world. The descent was not simply the arrival of heavenly visitors, it was the opening of a door that should never have been unlocked. And from that door, the next chapter in this hidden saga would emerge, when the forbidden union of angels and mortals brought forth a new race upon the earth. The Watchers, having sealed their covenant on Mount Hermon, turned their eyes fully upon the daughters of men. They saw their beauty, their fragility, and their fleeting lives, and what began as silent admiration grew into desire too strong to resist. For the first time, immortal beings longed to bind themselves with mortals, to taste the sweetness of earthly passion, and to claim what was never meant to be theirs. The union was not one of harmony, but of defiance. The women, caught in the gaze of these towering figures, felt both awe and dread. Some traditions whisper that the Watchers came with persuasion, others that they came with force, their overwhelming presence leaving little room for refusal. To the people of Earth, these unions seemed like blessings from gods, yet the heavens regarded them as corruption, a fracture in the natural order. Legends describe how the Watchers cloaked themselves in forms more pleasing to mortal eyes, disguising their celestial brilliance to draw women close. To share in their embrace was to be touched by fire and shadow, a mingling of the divine with the human that blurred the lines of existence. What was conceived in these unions was unlike anything the world had ever known, a seed that carried both heaven's power and man's mortality. Whispers passed among villages of strange unions, of women who carried children that grew too quickly, who bore sons whose strength outmatched even seasoned warriors. These unions stirred unease, yet fascination kept humanity from turning away. To lay with a Watcher was to touch the heavens, and though the consequences were hidden, the allure was undeniable. Yet beneath the surface of desire lingered betrayal. The Watchers were not only breaking heaven's decree, they were betraying the trust placed upon them as guardians. Their union with women was not merely physical but symbolic of rebellion, a declaration that they would no longer serve but rule. Through their children, they sought to leave a legacy that would anchor them to the earth forever. The women who bore their children carried the weight of both wonder and terror. Their wombs became vessels of forbidden creation, straining under the burden of life, too great for them to carry. Some gave birth to sons who towered above men, whose voices echoed like thunder, and whose appetites grew beyond measure. These mothers became both honored and cursed, remembered in whispers as the ones who first brought forth the giants. The Watchers, intoxicated by their unions, offered gifts in exchange for devotion. They revealed secrets of the stars, the crafting of weapons, the art of enchantments, and the mysteries of hidden powers. What seemed like blessings became chains, for the knowledge spread quickly, altering societies and drawing mankind further into the shadow of corruption. The forbidden union was not limited to flesh, it was also the mingling of wisdom reserved for heaven with mortals, unprepared for its weight. As the children of these unions grew, the world shifted. Humanity looked upon the giants with a mixture of pride and fear, marveling at their strength while trembling at their violence. The Watchers looked upon their offspring with satisfaction, believing they had forged something greater than either heaven or earth alone. Yet the heavens wept, for the boundary had been shattered, and the consequences of such defiance would reach far beyond the desires of a few angels. The forbidden union stirred chaos not only among mortals, but among the Watchers themselves. Some recoiled at the depths of their rebellion, while others embraced it fully, seeking to expand their influence and claim dominion over mankind. Their children became living proof of their defiance, mighty and uncontainable, born to walk as lords upon the earth. These unions were not hidden for long. Humanity began to recognize the danger in what had been unleashed. The giants, with their immense appetites and unmatched might, soon cast long shadows over villages and fields. What had begun as desire now carried the seeds of destruction, for no boundary, once broken, can remain without consequence. The forbidden union of angels and mortals stands as one of the most haunting acts of defiance in ancient lore. It speaks of the hunger of immortals to taste the finite, of beings meant for purity surrendering to corruption, and of humanity caught in a storm it could neither comprehend nor resist. The mingling of flesh and spirit created a race that should not exist, and from that race, history itself would be altered. The women who gave themselves to the Watchers were remembered as both cursed and chosen. Their children would dominate the earth, yet their wombs carried the burden of heaven's judgment. In their bodies, the line between divine and mortal dissolved, leaving scars upon the memory of mankind that could never be forgotten. The union was more than desire, it was the opening of a wound in creation itself. A wound that would bleed into every generation, echoing in myth, legend, and scripture. And from this wound would be born the giants, beings whose strength and arrogance would bring the world to the brink of ruin. The Watchers' forbidden union set the stage for a new and terrifying age, one where their children would rise not as protectors, but as conquerors. The earth would tremble beneath their steps, and humanity, once awed by their fathers, would soon cry out for deliverance from their sons. From the forbidden unions of Watchers and mortal women came a generation unlike any before it. The children born of this mingling were immense, towering far above the tallest man, their bodies vast, their voices like the roar of distant storms. They were called Nephilim, giants, beings of flesh and blood, yet touched by the fire of heaven. Their arrival marked the dawn of an age when the earth groaned beneath the weight of their presence. Accounts tell of their birth as unnatural and fearsome. Infants grew at unnatural speed, their strength surpassing grown men before they reached their youth. Their mothers, already broken by the strain of bearing such beings, watched as their sons rose into figures of awe and terror. Humanity, once enthralled by the beauty of the Watchers, now trembled as their children began to spread across the land. The giants were not gentle rulers. Their hunger was insatiable, their appetites too vast for the fields and flocks of men to satisfy. Crops vanished before their reach, herds were slaughtered without hesitation, and soon famine stalked villages that once welcomed the Watchers' gifts. The giants devoured not only the abundance of the earth, but also turned their hunger upon humanity itself, for nothing seemed sufficient to sate their endless need. Legends tell of their arrogance, how they walked among men as kings and conquerors, demanding worship and obedience. Their size alone inspired fear, but their cruelty ensured submission. With voices that thundered across valleys and footsteps that shook the ground, they ruled not through wisdom or compassion, but through raw power and intimidation. Humanity, created for freedom, found itself enslaved to beings it could neither resist nor escape. Their violence knew no boundaries. Stories describe battles where whole armies were swept aside by a single giant, where villages crumbled beneath their wrath, and where the earth itself seemed scarred by their passing. They shed blood, not only of men but of animals, twisting the balance of creation into chaos. Each act of violence pushed the world further from the harmony it once knew. The Watchers, who had once appeared as guides and teachers, now watched their children rise as tyrants. To some of them, pride filled their hearts as they saw their sons dominate the earth. To others, unease began to gnaw, for the giants bore not the beauty of angels, but the shadow of corruption, their forms monstrous, their hearts hardened by greed and violence. Humanity cried out under their oppression, their voices rising in desperation as their world darkened. What had begun as awe had become fear, and what had been desire had become torment. The land itself seemed cursed, unable to bear the weight of these colossal beings who stripped it bare. Hunger and bloodshed followed wherever they went, leaving mankind broken and weary. The giants themselves grew arrogant, considering themselves untouchable. Their strength was unmatched, their dominion unchallenged, and their voices carried as though they were gods among men. Some claimed divine status, demanding temples and offerings. Others waged wars among themselves, shaking the earth with battles that spilled rivers of blood. Their very existence became a blight upon creation. Yet, even within their might, the giants were haunted. For though their fathers were immortal, they themselves were not free from death. Their immense size and strength did not shield them from the weight of mortality, and in their pride they feared the fate of men. This fear grew into violence, for they sought to carve immortality through power and domination, believing that if their names endured, they would never truly perish. Their presence reshaped the earth. Villages became fortresses, fields turned to wastelands, and the once gentle rhythms of human life dissolved into chaos. The world before the Great Flood was no longer the world of harmony between man and earth, but a place dominated by the colossal offspring of rebellion, creatures that seemed born of nightmare and fire. The giants became symbols of excess and corruption, embodiments of what happens when boundaries are broken and power runs unchecked. They were not merely large men, but beings that carried in their veins the defiance of heaven and the fragility of humanity, a union that produced neither balance nor peace but destruction. Ancient memory preserves them in scattered myths and traditions from cultures separated by oceans and centuries. Their shadows linger in tales of titans, heroes, and monsters, suggesting that mankind never forgot the age when giants walked among them. The details may shift, but the memory of immense beings who consumed, ruled, and terrified remains etched into the collective soul of humanity. The birth of the giants was more than the rise of a race. It was the eruption of consequences, the living proof of what happens when divine law is broken. The Watcher's rebellion bore fruit, but that fruit was bitter, and the world soon trembled under its weight. These beings, mighty and terrible, would not only shape the earth, but would also bring it to the brink of destruction. And in the midst of this chaos, whispers began to spread of writings and visions, fragments of an ancient book that preserved the story of these monstrous offspring. Hidden for ages, those fragments would one day emerge as the Book of Giants, offering a glimpse into the world that existed before the flood. Long after the giants roamed the earth, fragments of their story were found buried in the desert sands. In the caves near Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls lay hidden for centuries, scholars uncovered tattered remains of a text unlike any other. It spoke not only of angels and men, but of the children born from their forbidden union, their struggles, their visions, and their downfall. This text, though incomplete, became known as the Book of Giants. The fragments were fragile, written on parchment that had endured the weight of millennia. Words had faded, sentences broke into silence, yet what remained was powerful enough to ignite curiosity and fear. For these were not tales of distant myth alone, but accounts that echoed the Book of Enoch, expanding upon it with chilling detail. Where Enoch hinted, the Book of Giants gave voice, allowing the giants themselves to speak through the fragments of time. The text described the children of the Watchers not only as towering figures of flesh, but as beings haunted by dreams and visions. Their arrogance was pierced by nightmares of destruction, their confidence shaken by the weight of prophecy. Though they had ruled the earth with iron and blood, their hearts carried the dread of coming judgment. These glimpses of their inner world painted them not simply as monsters, but as tragic figures burdened by their own fate, Scholars who pieced together the fragments recognized how rare such a text was. For while myths of giants appear across cultures, the Book of Giants gave them voice, recounting their fears, their counsels, and even their petitions to heaven. It was as if the dust of the desert had preserved a memory that humanity was never meant to forget, yet was too terrible to fully remember. The book itself was part of the wider Enochic tradition, texts that painted a vivid picture of the world before the flood. While much of Scripture gives only hints of this age, these writings open the door wider, revealing what might have happened in the days when angels descended and their children ruled. It was a world where humanity cried out for deliverance, and where even the giants themselves sensed their doom. The fragments are uneven, broken pieces that scholars labor to arrange like shards of a shattered mirror. Some lines speak of mighty figures like Gilgamesh, remembered as both hero and hybrid. Others describe terrifying dreams where trees were uprooted, mountains crushed, and floods swept away all life. Each piece offers a glimpse, yet none form a complete picture. The missing words are as haunting as those that remain, inviting endless questions. What makes the Book of Giants so compelling is its raw humanity, even when speaking of beings larger than life. The giants are portrayed not only as oppressors, but as mourners of their own fate, creatures who sensed that their rebellion could not last. They sought mercy, they sought answers, but the heavens remained silent. This silence resounds through the fragments, echoing like the unanswered cries of those doomed to fall. The discovery of the Book of Giants was a revelation for scholars, but for those who seek hidden knowledge, it was confirmation of ancient whispers. The Dead Sea Scrolls, hidden in the caves for nearly 2,000 years, had preserved not only sacred texts, but also forbidden histories. That the Book of Giants was among them suggests it held a place of significance for those who preserved these scrolls in secrecy. Its survival is itself a mystery. How did such a text endure when countless others were lost? Was it hidden deliberately, kept from destruction by those who feared its contents would be erased? Or was it chance, a fragment carried through time by the stubbornness of desert air and stone? Whatever the reason, its re-emergence has rekindled questions humanity has long avoided. For the Book of Giants does not only recount events, it hints at meanings. It suggests that humanity's story is interwoven with beings of another order, that what is called myth may be memory, and that the flood of Noah was not simply punishment for human wickedness, but for the corruption unleashed by the Watchers and their offspring. It forces us to consider that the giants were not merely symbolic, but part of a history that the ancients preserved at great cost. To read its fragments is to feel as though one stands at the edge of a vast abyss, glimpsing shapes in the shadows yet never seeing the whole. Each missing line deepens the mystery, leaving us to wonder what secrets were lost forever. Did the book once describe the Watchers in greater detail? Did it recount the full pleas of the giants, or the visions of Enoch as he walked among them? The silence of the missing portions weighs heavily, almost more haunting than the words that remain. The Book of Giants emerges not as a complete tale, but as a chorus of broken voices, voices of angels who fell, of hybrids who ruled and feared, of humanity crushed beneath them. These voices, carried across centuries, now rise again through the torn parchments discovered in the desert. They challenge us to listen, to piece together what fragments we can, and to accept that our past may be darker and stranger than we were ever taught. For as long as mankind remembers, questions will linger. What truths were buried in the caves of Qumran, and why were they hidden so carefully? The Book of Giants does not answer them fully, but it keeps them alive, like embers glowing faintly beneath the ashes of time. And within these fragments lies a name that bridges worlds and myths, a figure remembered both in the Book of Giants and in ancient Mesopotamian tales. a name that connects the giants of Scripture with the legends of kings. Gilgamesh, the hero whose story spans civilizations. Among the fragmented lines of the Book of Giants, one name emerges with startling clarity: Gilgamesh. To many, this name belongs to the legendary king of Uruk, the hero of one of the world's oldest epics. But in the fragments preserved at Qumran, Gilgamesh is not merely a mortal ruler, he is counted among the hybrid offspring of the Watchers. His presence in both Mesopotamian myth and Hebrew apocalyptic writings bridges two worlds, suggesting that the stories of giants were not confined to a single culture, but echoed across civilizations. The Epic of Gilgamesh portrays him as a man of immense strength, part divine and part human, whose journeys carried him to the edges of the world in search of immortality. His stature was said to surpass ordinary men, his power enough to subdue beasts and conquer kingdoms. In Mesopotamia, he was revered as a great king, yet also remembered as a figure of arrogance and struggle, wrestling with the limits of his own existence. For Gilgamesh to appear in the Book of Giants transforms him from a mythical hero into something darker. It places him among the children of the Watchers, the Nephilim, whose dominion over mankind was a mark of rebellion rather than blessing. If the text is to be believed, then Gilgamesh was not simply a symbol of Mesopotamian pride, but a living reminder of the age when heaven's sons mingled with the daughters of men. The thought that Gilgamesh was remembered both as king and giant invites a haunting possibility: that myths preserved in clay tablets and sacred texts are echoes of the same reality, refracted through time and culture. In one tradition, he is celebrated, in another, condemned. Both, however, recognize his nature as a being beyond ordinary men, caught between divinity and mortality. This dual remembrance suggests that the giant's memory lingered long after the floodwaters receded. Survivors of ancient calamities carried their stories across lands and generations, reshaping them into epics, legends, and sacred warnings. Gilgamesh, remembered in stone and scroll alike, may be the clearest sign of this continuity, a shadow of the Nephilim cast across the whole of the ancient Near East. His quests for immortality reflect the deeper tragedy of the giants themselves. Born of angels, they longed for eternal life, yet burdened by human blood, they could not escape the fate of mortality. Gilgamesh's journey to the underworld, his desperate pursuit of eternal youth, echoes the fears of all the hybrids who sensed their doom. No matter their strength, their towers, or their kingdoms, death stalked them as surely as it stalked the weakest man. The presence of Gilgamesh among the giants also blurs the line between history and myth. Archaeologists have uncovered inscriptions and remains that suggest Gilgamesh was indeed a historical figure, a ruler of Uruk who lived around 2700 BC. Yet if the fragments are true, his legacy was far more than that of a mortal king. It was the legacy of a giant, one whose existence bore witness to the rebellion of heaven's watchers. Such an idea unsettles conventional understanding of history. It implies that the boundaries between legend and fact are porous, that ancient kings remembered as larger than life may have been literally larger, born of unions that defied divine law. Gilgamesh is not alone in this ambiguity. Other figures, from Nimrod to Hercules, carry similar traits, remembered as mighty hunters, warriors, or demigods. The Book of Giants places them all within a single, forbidden lineage. The fragments that mention Gilgamesh are incomplete, leaving us only tantalizing glimpses. Yet the very survival of his name within these writings is striking. It suggests that the authors of these ancient scrolls saw no contradiction in placing him among the hybrids. They knew his story not as distant myth, but as part of the same dark chapter that began with the descent of the Watchers. For centuries, the Epic of Gilgamesh was considered a triumph of Mesopotamian literature, a poetic reflection on mortality and meaning. With the discovery of the Dead Sea fragments, it acquires a new dimension. What if the epic is not only poetry but memory, preserving in stylized form the story of a giant who once walked the earth? The possibility redefines our understanding of myth. It suggests that the line separating biblical tradition from pagan legend is thinner than we imagine, that both streams of memory point back to a common event, the Age of Giants. Gilgamesh, then, is not just a cultural hero, but a survivor of that age, remembered both as ruler and rebel, as seeker and oppressor. The connection between the Book of Giants and Mesopotamian epics forces us to ask whether the stories of old were not imaginative tales, but distorted recollections of forbidden history. Perhaps the clay tablets of Sumer and the parchments of Qumran are fragments of the same shattered mirror, reflecting different angles of a truth too immense for one tradition alone to hold. And as the fragments reveal, the giants were not only figures of dominance, but of dread, haunted by visions of their coming destruction. Among those visions, preserved faintly in the broken text, the giants themselves dreamed of a flood, a sweeping force that would erase them from the earth. While the Watchers and their children wrestled with dreams of doom, humanity lived in a reality far darker than any nightmare. Men and women, once free to cultivate the earth, now labored beneath the shadow of giants whose appetites devoured their harvests and whose violence claimed their lives. What had begun as awe at the Watcher's radiance became a daily struggle for survival in a world overrun by corruption. The giants' hunger knew no restraint. Fields of grain vanished in days, livestock slaughtered for feasts that lasted only hours. When the land could no longer sustain their craving, they turned upon mankind itself, consuming flesh and spilling blood without hesitation. Villages trembled at their approach, for no wall was high enough, no army strong enough to withstand them. Their laughter echoed across valleys, a sound of mockery and terror as they feasted on the weak. Human life, sacred and fragile, was cheapened by their dominance. Parents hid their children in caves, desperate to keep them from the eyes of the hybrids who saw mortals as little more than prey. Families fled from fertile lands into barren wilderness, preferring hunger to the certainty of slaughter. The earth, once a place of abundance, became a field of despair, its rhythms shattered by the violence of beings too great for it to bear. The Watchers had given their children knowledge, and with that knowledge came further cruelty. Weapons of iron and bronze glimmered in giant hands, instruments of death that no mortal could resist. They wielded sorcery as easily as swords, binding men with enchantments and twisting the natural order. What was once wisdom became tyranny, what was once knowledge became chains. The cries of humanity rose like smoke, carrying their grief to the heavens. They cried not only for lost harvests and slain families, but for the corruption of the world itself. The very earth seemed wounded, its soil soaked in blood, its forests stripped bare, its waters polluted with death. The balance of creation trembled, and mankind's voice joined with creation's groan in a chorus of anguish. These cries were not whispers, they were shouts born of desperation, rising from countless throats across the earth. Men prayed beneath the stars, women wept into the ground, children clung to hope that something greater than giants still watched over them. Their prayers were fragmented yet unified, a plea for deliverance from a world spiraling into chaos. The giants, in their arrogance, ignored these cries. To them, humanity was insignificant, a resource to be consumed, a people too small to matter. They saw themselves as gods towering above mortals, demanding fear and worship. But the heavens heard what the giants dismissed, and each cry became a testimony against them. Ancient traditions describe how humanity's suffering reached the ears of the archangels, who looked down in sorrow and fury. The cries of the oppressed were too loud to ignore, their blood too plentiful to overlook. The earth itself, weighed down by violence, joined the plea as though the very soil and stone begged for release. The suffering of mankind paints the giants not merely as rulers but as parasites, beings who consumed without giving, who destroyed without building, who left only devastation in their wake. Their might was not creative but corrosive, a force that unmade what had been carefully crafted at the dawn of time. Humanity's cry was more than desperation, it was accusation. It declared that those meant to watch had become destroyers, that those meant to guide had become tyrants. It was the cry of a people stripped of dignity, longing for justice, hungering for the day when the giants' shadows would no longer darken the land. These cries became the turning point of the saga. For while the Watchers had bound themselves in rebellion and their children spread terror across the earth, humanity's voice rose higher than their arrogance. What men could not accomplish with weapons, they accomplished with prayers, lifting their anguish into the heavens where judgment awaited. The Book of Giants, alongside other ancient writings, preserves the memory of this cry, reminding us that even in the darkest age, the voice of the oppressed is heard. No giant, however powerful, could silence the chorus of humanity, and no rebellion, however vast, could drown out the demand for justice. The cries of humanity, rising like a storm of voices, reached the highest realms. Their anguish was not forgotten, nor their blood ignored. From the throne of light, the command went forth, and the mightiest of the archangels gathered to deliberate. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel stood together, radiant in authority, their presence filling the heavens with awe. They were the guardians of creation, chosen to carry out the will of the Most High, and now they faced the corruption that had spread across the earth. The council was solemn, for the matter before them was grave. The Watchers had abandoned their stations, forsaken their calling, and bound themselves to mortals in rebellion. Their children, the giants, had defiled the land with violence, bloodshed, and unquenchable hunger. The cries of mankind demanded justice, and the earth itself seemed to tremble beneath the weight of corruption. Yet judgment of this magnitude required unity, for what they were about to unleash would change the face of the world. Michael, often remembered as the warrior of heaven, spoke first. His voice carried the weight of battle, declaring that the Watchers had crossed the boundary of their authority, and that their rebellion could not go unpunished. He reminded his brothers that these angels were meant to protect, not destroy, and that their fall had left humanity enslaved. For Michael, justice was clear. The Watchers must be bound, and their offspring erased. Gabriel, messenger of divine decrees, considered not only the rebellion of the Watchers, but the corruption they had sown through forbidden knowledge. Weapons, sorcery, enchantments, and perversions of wisdom had spread across the earth. Humanity was not only oppressed by giants, but seduced by secrets never meant to be theirs. Gabriel's voice was resolute, declaring that the taint could not remain, for if left unchecked, it would poison generations to come. Raphael, the healer, carried sorrow in his words. He saw the earth wounded, scarred by violence and stripped of harmony. He spoke of rivers running red, of fields trampled, of children hidden in caves out of fear. To him, the corruption was not only spiritual but physical, a sickness that infected creation itself. Raphael's counsel was mercy for humanity, but severity toward the Watchers and their children, for healing required the removal of disease. Uriel, whose name means light of God, spoke last. His voice was steady, filled with the fire of revelation. He reminded the council of the dreams that haunted the giants, visions of uprooted trees and raging floods. These dreams were not inventions but prophecy. The giants themselves had seen their fate, and the earth's destruction had already been inscribed in the heavens. Uriel declared that the flood was inevitable, a cleansing wave that would erase the corruption and restore balance. Together their voices formed a judgment. The watchers would be seized, bound in chains of darkness, cast into the depths to await the final day. Their children, the giants, would not endure, their flesh consumed by sword and famine, their spirits left to wander as restless beings upon the earth. Humanity would be given deliverance, though not without suffering, for the flood would cleanse not only the giants but all corruption. The council's decision was not made lightly. The archangels carried the weight of justice, knowing that their actions would shape the destiny of mankind. Their gathering became the turning point of the hidden war, the moment when heaven resolved to intervene directly in the affairs of earth. No longer would the cries of humanity go unanswered, nor the rebellion of angels remain unchecked. Michael was appointed to lead the charge against the Watchers, his sword blazing with the authority of the throne. Gabriel was tasked with declaring the decree, ensuring that both angels and men knew the fate that awaited. Raphael would bring healing to the remnants of creation, restoring what could be restored. Uriel would guide the unfolding of prophecy, illuminating the meaning of visions and dreams so that humanity might understand the purpose of the judgment. Their counsel resounded through the heavens, and their decision was carried like fire into the depths. The Watchers, once radiant, now trembled at the news of their impending chains. The giants, though still feasting upon the earth, sensed the shifting of destiny in the air. Humanity, though unaware of the details, felt a stirring of hope, as if their cries had pierced the veil between mortal and divine. This gathering of archangels reveals the seriousness of the rebellion. It was not merely a dispute among angels or a tragedy of lust. It was a corruption so great that the very order of creation had been shaken. The archangels' council was the declaration that the rebellion would not continue unchecked, that justice, though delayed, was now at hand. Legends preserve their dialogue, fragmentary though it may be, showing a glimpse of celestial deliberation. It was a council not of vengeance but of restoration, for the earth was meant to flourish, not decay beneath the weight of giants. Their decision was firm, their unity unbroken, and their command irreversible. With their decree established, the archangels prepared to act. The Watchers, who once descended with fire and brilliance, would now be seized in chains, their light extinguished. The giants who once mocked men would soon tremble with fear. The cries of humanity had been heard, and the heavens were no longer silent. The Watchers, who once descended in radiance upon Mount Hermon, now awaited their fate with dread. Their rebellion had brought them temporary power, their offspring had ruled with iron and blood, but the decree of the archangels was upon them. Their arrogance had collapsed into fear, for even in their rebellion they knew the strength of heaven's authority. The chains of judgment were being forged, and soon they would be bound. Michael, appointed as the warrior, descended with authority blazing like fire. His presence shook the heavens and the earth, for he carried not his own power, but the decree of the Most High. The Watchers, once clothed in glory, shrank before him. They remembered the oath they had sworn together, and now they watched as that oath became their downfall. Their unity in rebellion could not shield them from the justice of heaven. The chains prepared for them were no ordinary bonds. They were forged from the command of the divine, unbreakable and eternal. Darkness awaited them, not the radiant skies they once knew. The abyss yawned open, a place of confinement, until the day when all judgment would be completed. The Watchers, who longed for the embrace of mortal women, would now know only the cold embrace of shadow and silence. One by one they were seized, their protests rising into the air, but their words carried no weight. They cried that they had taught mankind wisdom, that they had given gifts of knowledge, yet their gifts were corruption, their wisdom poison, and their knowledge destruction. Their cries did not move the archangels, for the evidence of their rebellion was carved into the broken world. Semjaza, their leader, who once stood upon Mount Hermon and bound his companions with oath, now trembled as the chains wrapped around him. His pride was shattered, his radiance dimmed. He had promised his followers they would share the burden together, and now that promise was fulfilled in a way he had never desired. Bound in iron darkness, he became a warning for every being that looked upon him. The Watchers were cast into the depths, their light extinguished, their forms imprisoned in shadow. The abyss swallowed them whole, a place where time stretched into silence, where they awaited the final judgment. No longer would they roam the earth, no longer would their whispers seduce mortals. Their defiance had ended in captivity, and their rebellion in chains. The fall of the Watchers was not only a punishment for them, but a message to creation. No power, however radiant, could withstand the decree of the Most High. Angels who abandoned their place could not claim dominion forever. Their fall echoed through the heavens, a reminder that pride and desire cannot overthrow the laws set at the foundation of the world. The giants, left without their fathers, looked upon this fate with fear. Their strength was immense, but they understood that the same judgment awaited them. If the Watchers, beings of heaven, could be bound and cast into darkness, how much more vulnerable were the children born of rebellion? The chains for the Watchers became a symbol, a sign that the days of the giants were numbered. Humanity, though still oppressed, began to sense a shift. Though the giants still roamed, though blood still stained the ground, the knowledge that their oppressors' fathers had fallen into chains spread like a whisper of hope. Justice had begun its course, and the world, once dominated by corruption, now trembled with the promise of restoration. The Watchers' punishment was severe, yet fitting. They had abandoned their stations of light, and now they were bound in darkness. They had sought to rule the earth through forbidden union, and now they were stripped of all dominion. Their chains became the measure of divine justice, unbending and absolute. Ancient traditions remember them as imprisoned beneath mountains or buried deep in caverns, sealed away from the world of men. Legends across cultures whisper of divine beings cast down and bound, stories that echo the same truth, that rebellion against the divine order carries consequences no power can escape. Their chains were not the end of their story, but a pause until the final judgment. They would remain confined, their memory preserved in fragments of scripture and myth, their rebellion a warning to all who sought to break boundaries that should never be crossed. Their light had become darkness, their freedom bondage, their defiance silence. The Watchers' fall is the mirror of their descent. Where once they came down in radiance upon Mount Hermon, now they sank into shadow, bound by chains unbreakable. Their story, from brilliance to rebellion to captivity, stands as one of the most haunting chapters in the hidden history of the world. Their children remained above, still roaming the earth, still feasting upon mankind, yet their father's fate had shown them what awaited. The judgment that began with the Watchers would not spare the giants, for the decree had been spoken, and their destruction was already written. When word spread that the Watchers had been seized and chained in the abyss, the earth itself seemed to shudder. The giants, once unshakable in arrogance, felt fear for the first time. They were mighty in stature, unmatched in strength, yet their fathers, radiant beings of heaven, had been humbled and silenced. If the Watchers could be bound, what hope remained for their hybrid sons? The giants gathered in great councils, their voices echoing like thunder across valleys. They spoke of their father's downfall, of the judgment that hovered above them like a looming storm. Pride wrestled with fear in their heart. Some mocked the thought of their destruction, claiming that no power could match their size. Others, haunted by dreams and visions, trembled in silence, knowing their fate was sealed. Their desperation led them once more to seek Enoch. They had pleaded through him before, and though the message returned was not what they desired, they clung to the faint hope that mercy could still be found. Messengers were sent, towering figures bending low before a man of flesh and blood, begging him to write their petitions, to carry their words into the heavens. The words of their pleas were filled with sorrow and fear. They asked why they should suffer for the choices of their fathers, why their lives should be cut short when they did not choose to be born. They begged for more time, for reprieve, for any chance to escape the tide of judgment that pressed against them. Their voices, though once filled with cruelty, now carried the weight of dread. Enoch recorded their words faithfully, yet his heart carried no illusion. He knew what the heavens had decreed, and he understood that their petitions, no matter how desperate, would not reverse the sentence. Still he carried their words, for his duty was not to alter judgment, but to bear witness. His writings became a record of giants humbled, voices that shook the earth now whispering for mercy. When the response came, it was silence. No word of pardon, no gesture of compassion. The heavens, once patient, had turned their face away. Judgment had already been written, and no plea could rewrite the story. The giants, realizing their cries went unheard, were struck with a despair deeper than fear. Their hearts hardened in rage, for some chose to fight their fate, while others sank into madness. Their desperation turned violent. Unable to alter their destiny, they unleashed their fury upon mankind with renewed ferocity. Villages were torn apart, fields consumed, and rivers ran with blood. Their time was short, and their hunger unending. Humanity's cries grew louder, reaching heaven once more, confirming that the earth could no longer sustain the presence of these beings. Yet, even as they raged, the giants could not escape the weight of prophecy. Dreams continued to haunt them, visions of waters rising, of mountains swallowed, of themselves drowning beneath waves that no strength could resist. Their arrogance could not silence the whispers of fate, and every feast, every conquest, carried the taste of impending ruin. The desperation of the giants paints them as tragic figures, beings caught between two worlds. They were neither fully angel nor fully man, creatures born of rebellion rather than design. Their strength became their curse, their size a burden too great for the earth to endure. They sought meaning in violence, but found only despair. Legends suggest that some among them turned against one another, fighting for dominion as fear eroded their unity. Brother struck brother, and their wars scarred the land with devastation. In their desperation, they devoured not only mortals but themselves, cannibalizing their kind as famine spread. Their power had become a prison, their hunger a torment without relief. The giants' pleas, preserved in fragments, reveal more than arrogance. They reveal sorrow, denial, and a futile struggle against the decree of heaven. Their desperation is the echo of rebellion's consequence, a reminder that no strength can overturn divine judgment once it has been spoken. Humanity, though still terrified, began to sense that the days of their tormentors were numbered. The giants raged louder, yet their fury seemed hollow, like thunder that precedes a storm already destined to break. Their desperation marked the twilight of their reign, a fading shadow that clung to the earth before the flood would wash it away. Their downfall was no longer a question of if, but of when. The silence of heaven was not mercy, but confirmation that their end had been decided. The giants, once gods in the eyes of men, had become mourners of their own fate, towering figures collapsing under the weight of prophecy. The heavens had spoken, the archangels had decreed, and the fate of the earth was sealed. A flood, vast and unstoppable, was prepared to descend upon the world. It would not be a storm of chance, but a deliberate act of cleansing, a divine reset to purge the corruption sown by the Watchers and their hybrid offspring. The waters would erase the giants, silence their violence, and restore balance to a wounded creation. Signs began to unfold across the earth, skies darkened, storms gathered with unusual fury, and rivers swelled as if creation itself anticipated what was to come. Humanity, long oppressed by giants, looked upon these signs with both terror and faint hope. They sensed that judgment was near, that their cries had been answered, though the cost would be great. The giants themselves felt the dread more keenly. Their dreams had already foretold their destruction, and now the skies confirmed it. They mocked the idea of death, boasting of their size and strength, yet unease stirred in their hearts. Water, that simple and unstoppable force, would be their undoing. No sword could resist it, no wall could contain it, no might could stand against its relentless tide. Among humanity, whispers spread of one man chosen to prepare for the coming judgment. Noah, descendant of Enoch, was commanded to build an ark, a vessel of survival against the flood. His obedience became the dividing line between life and death. While the giants raged and mocked, while mankind doubted, Noah labored with quiet faith, shaping wood into a sanctuary against the storm. The giants, in their arrogance, laughed at the sight of the ark. They scoffed at the thought that waters could cover mountains, mocking the smallness of the man who worked day after day. Yet the ark rose steadily, a silent testimony of coming judgment. Every plank, every beam was a warning that time was short. The Watchers, bound in chains, could only watch in silence. Their rebellion had unleashed this calamity, and their sons would pay the price. From their prison in the abyss, they knew the flood was coming, yet they could not intervene. Their voices were gone, their power stripped, their legacy collapsing like towers in a storm. When the rains began, they did not fall gently. The heavens opened, torrents cascading with fury, while fountains erupted from the deep. The earth convulsed as waters surged from above and below, uniting in a deluge that drowned valleys, swallowed cities, and erased boundaries. Mountains disappeared beneath the waves, and the giants, once rulers of the land, found themselves thrashing helplessly against the flood. Their size, once their advantage, became their curse. Their immense bodies weighed them down, dragging them into the depths. They roared against the waters, striking with fists that could shatter stone, yet no blow could part the flood. They climbed hills, clung to trees, but each refuge was swept away. Their voices, once filled with arrogance, now echoed with despair as they realized their doom had arrived. Humanity, too, suffered, for only Noah and those with him found shelter in the ark. The flood did not spare the innocent, for the corruption had spread far and wide. Yet through Noah's obedience, a remnant was preserved, a seed of life carried upon the waters like a lantern in the darkness. The flood was not only a punishment, but a purification. The earth, scarred by blood and violence, was washed clean. The cries of humanity, the groans of creation, were answered in waves that drowned corruption and silenced the giants forever. The waters buried their bones, their cities, their memories, leaving only fragments that would echo through myth and legend. For 40 days and nights the flood raged without mercy. The ark drifted upon the waters, a fragile vessel carrying the future of mankind. Inside, Noah and his family prayed, listening to the roar of waves and the cries fading into silence outside. Their survival was not chance, but the fulfillment of a promise, a sign that the story of humanity would not end in despair. The giants, once feared as gods, became nameless corpses beneath the flood. Their laughter was gone, their feasts ended, their violence silenced. What remained of them would be preserved only in stories, scattered across cultures, remembered as titans, heroes, or monsters of old. Their reality was drowned, but their shadow lingered in the memory of mankind. The flood was more than water, it was a cosmic judgment. It erased not only flesh, but the corruption that had woven itself into creation. It marked a new beginning, though the scars of the old world would never fully vanish. For even after the waters receded, whispers of giants would echo, and humanity would never forget the age when angels fell and their children ruled. The coming of the flood fulfilled the visions of the giants, silenced the cries of the oppressed, and carried forward the promise that justice, though delayed, always arrives. The waters that rose in fury became the turning point of history, a wave that washed away rebellion and opened the path to renewal. When the waters of the great flood receded and the ark came to rest upon the mountains, a new world emerged, silent and washed clean. The giants were gone, their colossal bodies buried beneath layers of silt and stone, their voices silenced by the judgment that had swept across creation. Yet their memory, their shadows, lingered. For even after the flood, whispers arose of figures who carried the blood of the giants, remnants who survived in hidden ways, and echoes of their power that reverberated across generations. The Bible itself hints at these survivors. In the Book of Numbers, the scouts sent by Moses into Canaan spoke of towering men, descendants of Anak, whose size filled the Israelites with fear. In Deuteronomy, we hear of Og, king of Bashan, remembered as the last of the Rephaim, a giant whose bed was said to stretch over 13 feet in length. Later still, the story of Goliath would enter history, a champion of the Philistines who stood head and shoulders above any ordinary man. These accounts suggest that the giants, though diminished, were not erased entirely. Some traditions claim that a remnant of the Nephilim found refuge before the waters fully consumed the land, slipping into remote regions or taking to the high mountains. Others whisper of watchers who, though chained, had sown their corruption too deeply into humanity to be completely destroyed. Their bloodlines may have seeped into men, producing individuals of great stature and strength who carried fragments of that forbidden heritage. The figure of Og, king of Bashan, is particularly striking. His name appears not only in the Bible but in rabbinic traditions, where legends claim he clung to the outside of Noah's Ark, surviving the flood by sheer tenacity. While this tale may be symbolic, it reveals the enduring belief that not all the giants were swept away. Whether through survival or rebirth, their presence echoed in the lands where Israel later wandered. These echoes extended beyond Israel's borders. The Philistine cities, the lands of Canaan, and the territories of the Amorites all carried stories of immense warriors. Some were remembered as kings, others as soldiers whose size made them living weapons. Their presence created fear among nations, for to face a descendant of the giants was to stand against a living reminder of an age when heaven and earth had mingled in defiance. Yet these survivors were shadows compared to their forefathers. No longer did they rule the earth, devouring crops and men with unchecked hunger. Their numbers were fewer, their dominance broken. They were remnants of a greater corruption, living proof that the flood had cleansed but not fully erased the legacy of the Watchers. Their presence served as a reminder that history's scars linger long after the wounds are healed. The echoes of the giants also found their way into myths across cultures. The Greeks spoke of titans and heroes, immense figures who fought gods and men alike. The Norse remembered the Jotnar, adversaries of the gods who dwelled in icy lands. The Celts told of the Fomorians, giants of chaos who once ruled the sea and land. Each story, though colored by culture, may be an echo of the same ancient memory, the age of the Nephilim. Even in lands far removed from the Near East, whispers remained. Mesoamerican traditions spoke of colossal beings destroyed by floods or fire, while Native American legends told of battles between tribes and giants who roamed the plains. These echoes stretch across the globe, as though the memory of beings too great for the earth was imprinted upon humanity itself, carried from generation to generation as both warning and wonder. The survivors who appear in biblical accounts often symbolize opposition to God's people. The giants of Canaan represented obstacles too great for ordinary men, yet they were defeated when Israel trusted in divine strength. Goliath, the champion of the Philistines, mocked the armies of Israel until he fell before a shepherd's stone. These stories suggest that though the giants remained, their power was no longer absolute. They became symbols of resistance, but also of defeat. For those who preserved these stories, the giants were reminders of judgment past and warnings of rebellion future. They were echoes of an age that had nearly consumed the world, proof that even in cleansing, fragments of corruption can endure. To encounter a giant was to confront not just a warrior of flesh and blood, but the living shadow of an ancient defiance that once shook the heavens. Their survival also raises haunting questions. If the giants endured after the flood, were they merely remnants of a bloodline, or was the corruption of the Watchers never fully removed? Did humanity continue to mingle with that forbidden inheritance, carrying it secretly into later generations? These questions remain unanswered, yet the persistence of giant traditions across cultures suggests that the shadow of the Nephilim was never fully erased. The echoes of their presence challenge us to see the flood not as the end of their story, but as a dividing line. Before it, they ruled with terror and arrogance. After it, they lingered as scattered remnants, no longer lords of the earth, but reminders of what once was. Their survival carried forward the weight of memory, ensuring that mankind would never fully forget the age when giants walked among them. These echoes, whether in scripture, legend, or myth, bind humanity to its forgotten past. They remind us that history is not always erased, but sometimes buried, surfacing in fragments, in stories, in the figures of kings and warriors who stand taller than their peers. The survivors and their descendants testify that the flood was not only a cleansing, but also a pause, leaving behind whispers of a defiance that could not be fully silenced. The Book of Giants itself, preserved in fragments, reflects this same theme. Like the remnants of the Nephilim, the book did not vanish but survived in broken pieces, hidden in caves, waiting to be uncovered. Its survival mirrors theirs, a reminder that what is buried is not always forgotten. The Book of Giants, like the beings it describes, exists not in full but in fragments. Discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, its remains are torn and incomplete, lines cut short by time, parchments eroded by sand and centuries. Yet even in its brokenness, the book carries immense power, offering glimpses into a world long buried beneath myth and flood. The caves of Qumran, where the scrolls were hidden, served as a vault of forgotten memory. Within them lay texts, sacred and secret, writings preserved by a community that understood their value. Among scripture and prophecy, the fragments of the Book of Giants emerged, a puzzle of torn sentences and faded ink. Each piece holds a fragment of truth, and when assembled, they form a haunting chorus of voices long silenced. The fragments speak of the giants' dreams, of their counsels, of their petitions through Enoch. They reveal their arrogance and their fear, their violence and their despair. Some passages mention names that link to other traditions: Gilgamesh, Mahaway, Ohya, figures who straddle the line between myth and scripture. Though incomplete, these glimpses suggest that the book once contained a rich narrative of rebellion, doom, and judgment. Scholars who study the fragments piece them together carefully, like archaeologists rebuilding a shattered vase. Each line, though fragile, expands our understanding of the world before the flood. Yet the gaps are just as telling as the words. What is missing may hold secrets too vast to recover, leaving us only with questions. Did the book describe the Watcher's descent in fuller detail? Did it record more of the giant's desperate pleas? Were there visions of the flood not preserved elsewhere? The broken nature of the text mirrors the broken nature of the giants themselves. Just as their lives were cut short, their memories erased by water and time, so too the book survives only in fragments. It is as though history itself conspired to ensure that their story would not remain whole, that humanity would only ever glimpse their shadow. Yet even fragments can carry weight. A single line can ignite imagination. A torn sentence can reveal worlds. The fragments we possess open doors to understanding, allowing us to see the giants not as distant myths, but as beings whose voices still whisper through time. Their fear, their arrogance, their visions of doom, all preserved in words scratched upon fading parchment. The fragments also remind us of the fragility of knowledge. How many other writings were lost to fire, flood, and decay? How many voices remain silent, buried beneath sands or sealed within stone? The survival of even these pieces is remarkable, a testimony to the resilience of memory and the stubbornness of truth. For those who discovered them, the Book of Giants was not a curiosity but a revelation. It expanded the story of Enoch, casting light upon details only hinted at in other texts. It revealed that the giants were not silent brutes, but beings who dreamed, who feared, who sought mercy. Their story, though tragic, was more human than many imagined, and their downfall more profound. The scattered fragments also serve as a challenge. They ask us to consider why such knowledge was hidden. Was it buried to protect it from destruction, or to conceal it from those who were not ready to hear? Did those who hid the scrolls know that one day they would be found, their voices rising again in an age far removed from the flood? The gaps in the text create a haunting silence, one that almost speaks louder than the words we possess. They invite us to imagine, to fill in the blanks, to wonder what secrets lie in the missing lines. This silence echoes the silence of heaven toward the giants' pleas, a reminder that not all questions receive answers, not all mysteries are meant to be solved. The fragments tie the story of the giants to a broader tradition, weaving their tale into the fabric of ancient memory. They confirm that myths across cultures may share a common source, that what humanity remembers as legend may once have been lived reality. The book, even in pieces, affirms that the giants were not figments of imagination but actors in a forgotten history. For readers today, the scattered fragments are both treasure and torment. They offer glimpses into a forbidden past, but never the full picture. They compel us to keep searching, to keep listening, to keep wondering about what lies hidden in the silences of history. The Book of Giants survives not as a complete tale, but as a whisper, scattered across the sands of time. Its fragments mirror the scattered bones of the giants themselves, traces of a world that once was, reminders of a corruption too vast to forget, and a judgment too powerful to erase. The tale of the Watchers and their colossal offspring does not stand alone. Across continents, oceans, and centuries, stories arise that echo with uncanny familiarity. Each culture dresses them in its own language and symbols, yet beneath the surface lies the same theme: beings from the heavens mingling with mortals, teaching forbidden wisdom, and leaving behind a legacy of giants, heroes, or monsters. These echoes suggest that the memory of the fallen angels is not confined to one tradition, but scattered like fragments of a shattered mirror across the world. In Greece, the Titans embody this theme. They were primordial beings of immense stature and power, older than the Olympian gods who would later overthrow them. The Titans were remembered as rebellious, seeking dominion beyond their place and their children. The The mighty heroes and demigods often bore traits that blurred the line between mortal and divine. Their struggle against the Olympians resembles the Watchers' defiance and their subsequent punishment, for the Titans too were cast down into Tartarus, a place of shadow and chains. Mesopotamian lore preserves another reflection, the Apkallu, beings of wisdom who descended to teach mankind arts, sciences, and secret knowledge. Some accounts portray them as sages, others as beings who corrupted humanity. Their stories bear striking resemblance to the Watchers who revealed forbidden mysteries, astrology, enchantments, metalworking, that altered mankind's course. In some traditions, the Apkallu are punished by flood, their legacy erased, leaving only whispers of their presence. In Hindu traditions, the Devas and Asuras mirror this dynamic of celestial beings entangled with mortals. Though not described in identical terms, their interactions with humanity often blur boundaries between divine and human. Some Asuras, like the Watchers, are depicted as rebellious beings who bring destruction, while others grant knowledge that reshapes civilizations. Their battles against the Devas echo the eternal struggle between order and chaos, light and corruption, that resonates with the story of the fallen. Mesoamerican mythology preserves its own memory of beings who walked as giants. The Aztecs spoke of the Quinametzin, a race of colossal figures who lived in an earlier age, destroyed by the gods for their arrogance. These giants were remembered as builders of great monuments, leaving behind massive stones that humans later inherited but could not replicate. Their destruction by flood or fire parallels the cleansing judgment upon the Nephilim. The Maya told of feathered serpents and divine beings who descended to earth, shaping civilizations with knowledge of astronomy, calendars, and architecture. Like the Watchers, these beings brought wisdom beyond human reach, wisdom that could elevate or corrupt. Their memory lingers in monuments aligned with the stars, testaments to knowledge humanity was never meant to possess. Among the Norse, the Jotnar stand as adversaries of the gods, beings of immense size who dwell in distant realms of frost and fire. They are not merely enemies, but ancestors and lovers of the gods themselves, producing offspring that carry both divine and monstrous qualities. This mingling mirrors the forbidden unions of the Watchers, producing children who live in tension between heaven and earth. Celtic legends recall the Fomorians, chaotic beings of immense power who once ruled over Ireland, opposed by the Tuatha De Danann. The Fomorians demanded tribute, consumed resources, and oppressed humanity, much like the giants of old. They were eventually overthrown, yet their memory lingered as symbols of destruction, hunger, and chaos. Even in Africa, traditions speak of sky beings who descended to the earth, mingling with mortals and producing offspring who stood taller and stronger than ordinary men. Some stories recall them as wise teachers, others as oppressors who devoured resources and ruled harshly until their destruction. The parallels are striking, suggesting that the story of fallen angels and giants is not bound to one land, but etched into humanity's collective past. The similarities across these cultures cannot be dismissed as coincidence. From Titans to Jotnar, from Apkallu to Fomorians, the themes repeat. Heavenly beings descend, boundaries are crossed, offspring are born, corruption spreads, and judgment falls. The details change, but the rhythm of the story remains. Perhaps the memory of the Watchers was carried by survivors of the flood, spreading into the myths of nations as humanity scattered across the earth. Or perhaps each culture preserved its own encounter with beings who broke the veil between realms. Either way, the resonance is undeniable. The fallen angels may be remembered under many names, but their shadow is the same. They stand as warnings of pride, of desire unchecked, of wisdom misused. Their presence in so many traditions suggests that humanity never forgot the age when the heavens opened and beings from beyond walked among men. The Book of Giants connects these echoes, reminding us that the story is not isolated but global. The Watchers and their children may have perished in the flood, but their memories spread across the world, preserved in myths that continue to haunt the human imagination. Beyond the sacred texts and ancient epics, the memory of giants lingers in folklore. These stories, passed from mouth to ear across generations, paint vivid pictures of colossal beings who once walked the earth. Though often dressed in the colors of legend, their shapes resemble the Nephilim, reminding us that the shadow of the giants has never fully faded. In Norse mythology, the Jotnar stand as towering beings of immense strength. They were not always enemies, sometimes lovers, sometimes kin, but always larger, wilder, and closer to chaos than the gods of Asgard. They represented forces untamed, mountains and storms given form, and their clashes with the gods echo the battles of giants against men in the ancient world. To the Norse, the world itself was shaped by the body of a slain giant, suggesting that these beings were woven into the very fabric of creation. Celtic tales remember the Fomorians, sea-dwelling giants who descended upon Ireland with cruelty and hunger. They demanded sacrifices, controlled the harvest, and oppressed the people until they were overthrown by the Tuatha De Danann. These myths echo the cries of humanity under the Nephilim, where giants consumed the fruits of the land and ruled with tyranny. In the British Isles, legends of giants dot the landscape. Stone monuments, great mounds, and standing stones are often attributed to their work. The Giant's Causeway in Ireland, with its towering basalt columns, was said to be built by a giant named Fionn mac Cumhail. In Cornwall, tales abound of Gogmagog, a giant defeated by the Trojan Brutus, whose fall carved cliffs into the earth. These stories reflect the enduring belief that the world's colossal structures were the legacy of beings larger than men. In Slavic lore, bogatirs and mighty warriors often face monstrous figures of immense size. These tales, while blending history and myth, preserve the sense that humanity once contended with beings far beyond ordinary strength. The giants in these traditions are both obstacles and teachers, sometimes embodying chaos, sometimes bestowing strength upon those who defeat them. Among Native American tribes, legends of giants are widespread. The Paiute of Nevada tell of the Siteka, a race of red-haired giants who warred against the tribes until they were finally trapped in caves and destroyed. The Choctaw remember Naholo, giants who lived before them, consuming flesh and spreading terror. These stories carry echoes of the same oppressive hunger that defined the Nephilim. South American traditions also preserve the memory of immense beings. The Inca spoke of viracochas, tall and powerful figures who once walked the earth before being swept away by a flood. Other tribes told of giants who devoured resources, leaving nothing for mankind. These myths mirror the biblical account, suggesting a common memory of an ancient catastrophe. Even in distant Polynesia, tales of giants appear. The Maori recall enormous beings who carved valleys and shaped coastlines. Some were remembered as protectors, others as destroyers, but always as figures beyond human scale. Their stories intertwine with the land itself, attributing natural wonders to the hands of beings too large for men to rival. European folklore often portrays giants as clumsy, brutish figures, more comic than terrifying. Yet beneath the humor lies a shadow of truth. Stories of Jack and the Beanstalk or tales of trolls in Scandinavia may be softened by time, but they preserve the ancient theme of humans confronting beings of immense size and strength. The laughter of fairy tales veils what may once have been memory of genuine fear. The persistence of giants in folklore across the globe suggests more than imagination. It reveals a collective memory passed down in forms suited to each culture, yet retaining the same elements: beings of immense stature, beings who consumed and dominated, beings who eventually fell. The stories differ in detail, but their foundation remains startlingly consistent. Folklore also ties giants to the landscape. Great stones, massive hills, and earthworks are often attributed to them. To ancient peoples, such feats of construction were beyond human ability, and so the giants became the builders of what could not otherwise be explained. From Stonehenge to earthen mounds in the Americas, the hand of giants was imagined in their creation. These legends, while wrapped in myth, may preserve distant memories of encounters with beings unlike ordinary men. Whether direct descendants of the Nephilim or echoes of their existence, the giants of folklore keep alive the haunting possibility that humanity once shared the earth with creatures who towered above them. The stories endure because they resonate with something deep in the human soul. They remind us of vulnerability, of the fragility of man before forces larger than himself. They remind us, too, that arrogance and hunger lead to downfall, for the giants of legend are never remembered as eternal rulers, but as beings whose reign was cut short. The giants of folklore may no longer stride across valleys or raise monuments of stone, but their presence lingers in story, in memory, and in the very shape of the land. Their shadows, though ancient, still fall across the imagination, testifying that the world once trembled beneath their steps. When the Watchers descended to earth, they did not come empty-handed. Along with their presence came secrets, knowledge reserved for the heavens, never meant for mortal hands. At first, these revelations appeared as gifts. Humanity, bound to the rhythms of soil and survival, was suddenly lifted into new realms of discovery. Yet beneath the glitter of wisdom lay corruption, for the knowledge they shared was forbidden, and the price of it would stain the world forever. The Book of Enoch recounts how the Watchers taught men the art of weapon-making. Iron and bronze, once hidden in the earth, were shaped into blades and spears. Before, men had fought with stone and wood. Now their hands carried the edge of death. The Watchers unveiled the secrets of metallurgy, transforming villages into armies and turning disputes into slaughter. What they presented as advancement was in truth the spread of bloodshed, for mankind was not ready for such power. Others revealed the mysteries of adornment. Women learned to paint their faces, to weave enchantments with cosmetics and jewelry, drawing eyes with beauty that deceived. What might have seemed harmless became a chain, binding men with lust and vanity. It was not merely knowledge of beauty, but of manipulation, of turning desire into a weapon. The Watchers corrupted innocence, reshaping the harmony of man and woman into a theatre of temptation. The art of enchantments and sorcery also flowed from their lips. Humanity was taught to summon spirits, to bind through spells, to seek power through unseen forces. Rituals grew in number, charms and incantations spread, and men began to rely not upon the Creator, but upon shadows and whispers. The Watchers seeded an addiction to power, offering mysteries that drew men deeper into corruption. Astronomy and astrology were unveiled as well. The Watchers taught the courses of the stars, the movements of the sun and moon, and the ways of interpreting signs in the heavens. Knowledge of creation was twisted into divination, leading men to believe they could control fate or foretell destinies. The wisdom that should have inspired reverence became a tool of manipulation, bending mankind toward idolatry and false worship. Even the knowledge of medicine was corrupted. Healing herbs were revealed, but their use extended into poison and the mixing of potions that twisted the natural order. What could have restored life was perverted into means of death, binding men to dependency upon dark arts rather than the rhythm of the earth. The Watchers turned cures into chains, enslaving mankind with knowledge that carried more curse than blessing. The monuments of antiquity bear witness to this forbidden knowledge. Across the earth, structures rise from stone, aligned perfectly with celestial bodies, built with precision beyond the apparent means of ancient peoples. From the pyramids of Egypt to the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, from stone circles in Britain to the megaliths of South America, each whispers of a wisdom older than history. Some see in them the fingerprints of watchers who passed their secrets of architecture and astronomy to men unprepared for their burden. Legends of lost civilizations echo the same theme. Atlantis, remembered as a land of great knowledge and power, was destroyed by flood and fire when its arrogance became too great. Ancient India preserves tales of vimanas, flying machines that soared across the skies, their designs etched into texts long before the modern age. In every corner of the world, stories emerge of technologies too advanced for their time, remembered not as blessings but as curses that brought ruin. The knowledge of the Watchers carried an allure. To fragile humanity, it appeared as advancement, a step toward greatness. Yet every gift concealed a hook, binding men to violence, lust, and idolatry. Their teachings spread swiftly, but with them spread bloodshed, corruption, and despair. What mankind perceived as progress was in truth the acceleration of its downfall. The flood was not only to wash away giants, but to erase the legacy of forbidden knowledge that had saturated the earth. Yet fragments remained. The memory of lost technology persisted in myths, in ruins, in half-remembered stories. The world after the flood still carried whispers of what had once been, whispers that inspired both wonder and fear. Even now, the legacy of the Watchers lingers in human imagination. Tales of alchemy, of secret societies guarding ancient wisdom, of hidden sciences lost to time, all may trace their roots back to the knowledge once given in defiance of heaven. The Watchers' teachings may have been buried beneath water and dust, but the hunger they planted in mankind remains. The forbidden knowledge of the Watchers teaches a haunting lesson. Wisdom without restraint becomes destruction. Technology without guidance becomes tyranny. To reach for secrets never meant for human hands is to invite ruin. The Watchers revealed wonders, but those wonders consumed the world, leaving only fragments of memory and ruins of stone. Their legacy challenges us even now, for humanity continues to chase knowledge, often blind to its cost. The story of forbidden wisdom warns that not all discoveries are blessings and that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. This shadow of secrecy, this battle over hidden knowledge, continues into our own age, where questions arise not only about the past, but about what has been deliberately concealed in the present. The story of the giants did not vanish with the flood, nor did it remain confined to ancient texts. In the modern world, theories abound that fragments of their history survive, buried beneath the earth, hidden in vaults, or deliberately suppressed. The Book of Giants, rediscovered in the caves of Qumran, reignited questions that ripple through archaeology, anthropology, and even politics. What if evidence of the Nephilim still exists, concealed from the public eye? Across the 19th and early 20th centuries, reports emerged of giant skeletons unearthed in America. Newspapers told of bones stretching over 10 feet, skulls with double rows of teeth, and burial mounds filled with remains unlike those of ordinary men. Farmers, explorers, and even early archaeologists claimed discoveries that hinted at a lost race. Yet these reports often vanished, artifacts disappeared, and stories were quietly dismissed as exaggerations or frauds. Some believed the truth was buried deliberately. Conspiracy theories point to institutions as guardians of secrecy. The Smithsonian is often accused of suppressing finds that would rewrite history, hiding bones of giants that contradict accepted narratives. Whether truth or legend, the persistence of these claims reflects humanity's suspicion that the full story has not been told. To accept giants as real would mean reshaping our understanding of history, evolution, and human origins. Archaeology itself reveals mysteries that fuel these theories. Cyclopean walls in Peru, with stones weighing hundreds of tons fitted with precision, remain unexplained. Megaliths in Baalbek, Lebanon, stand as colossal reminders of engineering beyond the capacity of known ancient tools. Even the Great Pyramids, aligned with stars and cardinal points, raise questions of how such knowledge emerged so suddenly. For many, the answer lies in remnants of forbidden wisdom passed down from beings beyond humanity. Modern researchers tie these mysteries to the Watchers' legacy. They argue that fragments of their knowledge survived the flood, carried by survivors or preserved in hidden places. The giants may be gone, but their influence lingers in technologies and monuments that defy explanation. If true, the suppression of this knowledge may be deliberate, protecting the world from truths that challenge authority. Some theorists suggest governments and secret societies guard these secrets, not only to preserve power, but to prevent humanity from understanding its true past. Whispers of hidden chambers beneath the Sphinx, sealed libraries in the Vatican, and vaults of forbidden artifacts hint at a history too dangerous to reveal. The Book of Giants itself survived only in fragments, perhaps because the full text was considered too disruptive for later generations. Others connect these stories to extraterrestrial theories. They argue that the Watchers were not only fallen angels, but beings from beyond the stars, descending in ancient times to alter humanity. The giants, then, were hybrids of human and otherworldly blood. Ancient texts and myths, from Sumerian tablets to biblical fragments, are seen as distorted records of these encounters. Whether angels or aliens, their presence reshaped the world, and their memory lingers in ruins, myths, and suppressed histories. The persistence of giant legends across cultures adds fuel to speculation. How could so many nations separated by oceans preserve similar stories of immense beings, floods, and forbidden wisdom? Either humanity's imagination coincidentally converged, or the stories reflect a shared truth buried in memory. For many, the latter is the more compelling explanation. These modern theories are not without controversy. Scholars dismiss them as pseudoscience, pointing to exaggeration, misinterpretation, or outright fabrication. Yet the hunger for hidden truth persists. The allure of giants lies not only in their might, but in what they represent, a forgotten chapter of human history, erased yet not silenced, buried yet still whispering. The debate raises deeper questions. Why would evidence be hidden if it exists? What power is gained by erasing the memory of giants? Some suggest that acknowledging them would validate ancient texts dismissed by modern thought. Others believe it would unravel the official timeline of history, forcing a reckoning with truths long resisted. The fragments of the Book of Giants serve as a spark for this speculation. Their survival proves that knowledge can be hidden and rediscovered, that stories dismissed as myth may hold fragments of reality. If a single scroll lay hidden in desert caves for 2,000 years, what else might remain concealed beneath stone, sand, or secrecy? Modern theories keep the story alive, weaving together archaeology, scripture, conspiracy, and imagination. Whether true or not, they reveal humanity's enduring suspicion that history has been edited, that the story of the Watchers and their children has not been fully told. The giants may be gone, their bones scattered, their monuments eroded, yet their memory fuels questions that challenge both science and faith. These questions linger, pointing toward a deeper mystery. What if the Book of Giants is not only a relic of the past, but a key to truths our world is not yet ready to face? The story of the Watchers and their towering offspring is not only an account of rebellion and destruction. Beneath its layers of tragedy and awe lies a mirror, reflecting truths about the human condition. The Book of Giants, though fragmented, is more than history or myth. It is a warning, a set of lessons whispered across millennia, urging us to see the consequences of pride, desire, and misuse of knowledge. The first lesson is about boundaries. The Watchers were appointed as guardians, not rulers. Their role was to observe, not to descend in longing for what was forbidden. By crossing the boundary between heaven and earth, they altered the natural order, and the consequences rippled through creation. Boundaries exist not to oppress, but to preserve harmony, and when they are broken, destruction follows. Humanity, too, is cautioned to respect the limits of what should remain untouched. Another lesson lies in the pursuit of forbidden knowledge. The Watchers brought secrets of the heavens, unveiling arts and sciences that seemed to elevate mankind. Yet knowledge without wisdom becomes a weapon. Iron sharpened into swords, enchantments twisted into sorcery, beauty turned into manipulation. Every gift was corrupted because it was not given in its proper time or place. The story warns that the pursuit of power without restraint brings ruin, a truth as relevant now as it was in the ancient world. The giants themselves embody the lesson of excess. Their hunger could not be satisfied, their strength could not be balanced, their dominance crushed rather than nurtured. They represent what happens when might is divorced from humility, when appetite becomes endless. Their downfall teaches that greatness without self-control becomes self-destruction, and that no power can sustain itself when it consumes everything around it. The silence of heaven toward the giants' pleas is also instructive. They begged for mercy, yet no answer came. Their existence was itself a violation, and their cries could not erase the choices of their fathers. The lesson here is sobering. Some consequences cannot be undone. Rebellion carries a cost that cannot always be reversed, and mercy does not negate justice. Humanity is reminded that actions shape destiny, and that certain paths, once taken, lead to places from which there is no return. Yet within this story lies hope. The cries of humanity did not go unheard. While the giants roared in arrogance, the oppressed lifted their voices in desperation, and those cries reached the heavens. Judgment was not only for the Watchers and their children, but for the sake of mankind who suffered beneath them. This teaches that no cry of the innocent is wasted, no voice unheard, no injustice overlooked. The flood itself carries a dual message. It was destruction, but it was also renewal. The waters swept away corruption, but they also preserved a remnant. Noah and his family symbolize survival through obedience, a reminder that faithfulness protects even when judgment falls. Humanity is warned of corruption, but also encouraged that deliverance is possible when one walks in alignment with divine will. The story also reveals the danger of pride. The Watchers believed their brilliance exempted them from command. The giants believed their strength made them untouchable, yet both were brought low. Pride blinds the eyes to truth and hardens the heart against warning. The Watchers ignored their station, the giants ignored their dreams, and both fell. The lesson is clear. No one is beyond judgment, and humility is the safeguard against destruction. There is also a warning about memory. The story of the giants was nearly erased, surviving only in fragments hidden in caves. Yet even shattered, it carries weight. Humanity is reminded that forgetting the past does not erase it. The scars of history remain, and the whispers of ancient corruption resurface in myths, legends, and ruins. The lesson is to remember, to guard against repeating what has already brought ruin. Modern parallels deepen the warning. As humanity once received forbidden knowledge, so too today discoveries emerge that hold both promise and peril. Advances in science, technology, and power carry the potential for great good, but also for great harm. The story of the Watchers warns that wisdom must accompany knowledge, or else humanity risks repeating the corruption of old, opening doors that should remain closed. Another lesson comes from Enoch, the scribe of heaven. He stood as a mediator, faithful to his calling, walking in harmony with the divine. His life contrasts sharply with the rebellion of the Watchers. Where they descended in lust, he ascended in obedience. Where they broke boundaries, he respected them. His example teaches that closeness to the divine does not come through grasping for power, but through humility, faith, and devotion. The fate of the Watchers also speaks of justice delayed, but not denied. For a time they roamed free, their children ruled, and humanity suffered. Yet judgment came, swift and inescapable. This assures us that even when evil appears unchallenged, it is not forgotten. Justice moves at a pace beyond human eyes, but when it comes, it is complete. Perhaps the greatest warning lies in the giants themselves. They were born not of their own choice, but of rebellion before them. Yet they became symbols of corruption, consuming and destroying until their very existence was unbearable. Their story warns that we inherit both blessings and curses, but it is our choices that shape whether we perpetuate destruction or walk toward restoration. The Book of Giants, though fragmented, holds a mirror to humanity. It warns against pride, unrestrained desire, misuse of knowledge, and the arrogance of strength. It reminds us that judgment is real, but so is deliverance. It cautions us not to forget, but to learn, for the shadows of the past are never as distant as they seem. The story lingers as both tragedy and lesson, urging us to remember that the fall of angels and the rise of giants are not merely tales of long ago, but warnings etched into the very fabric of history, speaking still to those willing to listen. The fragments of the Book of Giants draw a veil aside, revealing a world that once trembled beneath the footsteps of beings too great to endure. It is a tale of angels who abandoned their place, of unions never meant to be, of children who rose in might and fell in ruin. It is the memory of a flood that washed away corruption, leaving only whispers scattered through scripture, myth, and stone. These whispers persist across cultures, in legends of Titans, Jotnar, Fomorians, Apkallu, and Quinametsin. They echo in stories of Goliath and Og, in monuments too vast for ordinary hands, in ruins aligned with the stars. Though the giants themselves were buried by time and water, their memory lingers, refusing to be silenced. Humanity remembers in fragments, just as the Book of Giants survives in torn lines of parchment, carrying the shadow of truths too immense to vanish. The lessons of their story remain. Pride leads to downfall, desire unchecked to destruction, and knowledge misused to corruption. Yet within the darkness, light endures. The cries of humanity were heard, justice descended, and a remnant was preserved. The giants may be forgotten by the world, but not by the heavens, and their story remains etched into the fabric of history as both warning and reminder. Perhaps that is why the Book of Giants resurfaced after 2,000 years, hidden in caves until the time was right. Its fragments are like voices rising from the dust, calling us to remember what was nearly erased. They speak not only of the past, but to the present, urging us to see that the choices of long ago still echo in our world today. The Watchers fell because they believed they could defy their purpose. The giants perished because their hunger consumed everything in their path. Humanity cried out and was answered, proving that no voice raised in truth is too small to reach the heavens. These threads weave together into a single tapestry, a reminder that history is not only written in stone or parchment, but in the consequences of choice. The shadows of the forgotten still linger. They appear in myths retold, in ruins unexplained, in questions unanswered. Perhaps they remain not only to haunt us, but to warn us. For as humanity reaches again for knowledge and power beyond its grasp, the lessons of the Watchers and Giants grow ever more urgent. The Book of Giants does not conclude with triumph, but with silence. Its fragments break off, leaving us in wonder and unease. This silence is fitting, for it mirrors the silence that followed the cries of the giants and the silence of a world drowned in floodwaters. Yet within that silence there is also space for reflection, for humanity to listen, to remember, and to choose a different path. The story lingers not as entertainment, but as a haunting reflection on the dangers of arrogance, the fragility of creation, and the mercy of preservation. It reminds us that even the greatest can fall, that even the strongest can be silenced, but that hope remains for those who walk humbly, who remember, and who listen to the whispers carried through time. The giants may be gone, but their echoes remain. They call to us from fragments of scrolls, from the ruins of forgotten cities, from the myths of nations. They remind us that the past is never fully buried, and that what was once hidden often rises again, carrying lessons for those willing to hear. Their whispers, faint yet persistent, invite us to see history not as distant, but as alive. They urge us to tread carefully with knowledge, to respect boundaries, to recognize that choices ripple across time. For the shadows of the giants, though ancient, still stretch toward us, lingering at the edges of our imagination, waiting to be remembered. The Book of Giants closes not with a neat conclusion, but with mystery. It leaves us standing between silence and echo, between memory and imagination. Perhaps that is its greatest power, that it does not explain everything, but compels us to search, to question, to wonder what truths lie beyond the fragments we hold. The whispers of the forgotten remain, urging us to remember that what has passed may yet speak, and that in the stories of rebellion, judgment, and deliverance we may find warnings for our own age. The giants may be buried, but their lessons are alive, carried across centuries, calling us to listen before it is too late. If this journey through the Book of Giants has stirred your imagination, I invite you to stay connected. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss future explorations into mysteries of history and legend. Give this film a like to support its message, leave a comment with your thoughts or questions, and share it with those close to you who might also find wonder in these ancient shadows. Together we keep the whispers alive,